Today, we're going to be covering how to dispute Home Depot deductions. So some pretty high-level stuff about what deductions, or chargebacks as we often refer to them at Home Depot, what they are, how to conceive of them, and then how to kind of parse through the supplier hub to figure out where they are and how to kind of go through the official dispute process. So I think we can go to the next slide here. Some more people hop on here. So I am Peter. This is Annalee. Annalee is the one who heads up our Home Depot and our Lowe's product, which we just launched recently. So the not home goods, the home improvement retailers that we have products for. So she's got a lot of experience now with all that, dealing with deductions both at Lowe's and at Home Depot. So your more kind of technical questions, especially related to revenue loss at Lowe's and Home Depot, she'll be able to answer today. So if you have any kind of off the bat, just go ahead and put those in the Q&A, and I will line those up for our Q&A section at the end of this webinar. I am a writer on SupplierWiki as well. I don't have any technical knowledge. Just kidding. I do have some. So for today, we'll talk again, I was kind of referencing this a little bit already, but we'll do a high-level overview of deductions or chargebacks at Home Depot. We're going to go through a little bit of, the real zingers, the shortages, the ones that you see basically across the whole kind of spectrum of suppliers. These will be pretty common, and usually the more common, the more devastating. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and then we'll go through the actual disputing process. And then we're going to have a good, better, and best section for proof documentation. What's the kind of the ideal dispute from a purely proof documentation perspective. Then we'll do a little bit of a general Q&A before going into a mini kind of demo of our Home Depot product that Annalee will be guiding us through there at the end as well. So SupplierWiki is, I am on the SupplierWiki team. And so what we do is we create webinars like this one. We create a lot of articles and ebooks. We have a bunch of great Home Depot content on our website, and I may just send an article or two here in the chat at the beginning if you haven't seen those yet. We have a Home Depot acronyms cheat sheet, which we have usually a cheat sheet like that with the common acronyms for all of the major retailers that we have a product in. So we like to lay out that from the very beginning. There's a lot of jargon in the industry. And so if we can create a single source of truth sort of document for suppliers and retailers, that alone can help to kind of remove a lot of the kinks in the supply chain. So that's more what SupplierWiki does. We create the kind of educational materials that can help make communication between all these parties a little bit more smooth and maybe a little more efficient in that sense. So SupplyPike is the product side of things. If you want real accounting help with your deductions right away, you want to automate your dispute process. That's what SupplyPike is for. SupplierWiki is more of a kind of higher level educational branch of that product that will be helpful in more of a kind of high level sense. So stay tuned for some of those. I'll send some of those articles in the chat once we get started. So some common questions we get in these webinars: will we receive a copy of the slide deck? Yes, you will receive a copy of the slide deck and a recording to the inbox of the email that signed up for this webinar in about 3 to 4 business days. So watch out for that. If you're curious about other webinars that we've done, all of those live on our website as well. So supplierwiki.supplypike.com. If you have a team that's in a different retailer, or if you have to do deductions for Home Depot and a different retailer as well, all of that information could be pretty helpful to you too. So that all lives on our website. It also lives on YouTube if you're a YouTuber like I am. I am obsessed with YouTube. I consume vast amounts of YouTube in my free time. So we have a SupplyPike YouTube page as well. And all of our webinars, I believe, exist on that page as well. So if you wanted to just subscribe to that YouTube page, you could do that as well. But it is helpful. I'm a teacher too, so I always tell my students to take notes, even if you will be getting a copy of the slide deck at the end. That'll help you remember it a little bit better. So some stuff you might want to do that for, but take it with a grain of salt. You will be getting a slide deck. All of our slide decks, all of our webinar recordings live on our website too. So you can go and view those as well. We also have two main avenues for communication during these webinars that I like to kind of parse out in terms of what kind of communication is happening. If you have a formal question for Annalee or for myself, that can go in the Q&A tab. There you can put your questions as they come up throughout the webinar, and then we'll kind of cover those at the end. Or sometimes we'll cover them a little bit earlier if it's relevant to one of the slides that we're on, then we can do that. The webinar chat, which you'll see next to it, is for more of the public side of communication. So if, excuse me, if we have a question for you guys, we want your feedback on something, or if there's more of an open-ended kind of conversation that's happening about the types of deductions that you receive or something like that, all of that can live in the chat. So feel free to use either one. You can also use the chat for formal questions by selecting the hosts and panelists for the recipient of your message. That way it won't be public to everyone in the webinar. But if you have a little kind of helpful tip or something like that that you'd like to share with everyone else on the call, then you can select everyone for that and share that there as well. We really like to facilitate open and free communication between different business partners in these webinars. So please feel free to use either one. So I mentioned a little bit about what SupplyPike does already at the beginning. We'll also go over a little bit of, specifically in Home Depot, what does our product do? But generally, SupplyPike, what we do is we automate the dispute process. So we take the whole kind of supply chain into account. We can aggregate shipping documents automatically to do validity proofs on your deductions that you're receiving so that you don't have to go through that whole process by yourself. You can really take a look at all the deductions you're getting and see how valid or invalid they are. And then you can actually automate that dispute process as well once those shipping documents are automatically attached to that. So really what we're doing is we're taking a lot of time out of the accounting process so that suppliers can focus on their retailer business. Deductions are a part of life as a supplier, so they're not always invalid. I always like to say that there's human error at all kind of points in the supply chain. What we're doing is really just trying to figure out, where are those valid deductions? Where could you improve, or where could your 3PLs improve, or something like that? And then also we'd like to be able to hold major retailers accountable as well for some of the receiving errors that they do that result in revenue loss for suppliers. So that's that. One of the favorite things that I like to point out at this point as well is just that we're in a lot of product categories. We're in a lot of different retailers as well. So we're doing the home improvement side of things today, but we got our start in Walmart. So and now we have a great Amazon product as well. So we're working with a large variety of suppliers, which is my favorite part of it. We get to talk with people who are in really big organizations, where maybe Walmart is a smaller fraction of your total business as a CPG. And then we also get to work with some suppliers who are in one or two Walmart stores, who are really trying to just kind of keep their head above water with their Walmart business, but who are also excited to grow that business. So that's my favorite part. We get to interact with a bunch of different people, and that gives us a bunch of unique kind of perspectives on the supplier situation. So that's kind of my job at SupplierWiki, is to make sure that we're creating content for everyone that is relevant and helpful to everyone. And yeah, so I'm really proud of that too. But now I will hand it over to Annalee. She's going to talk about Home Depot. Take us away.
Okay. Thanks, Peter. Yeah. So what are deductions at Home Depot? So, every retailer kind of has a little bit of a different terminology for what deductions are. At Home Depot, they kind of refer to AP deductions as chargebacks. But basically, AP deductions, anything that the retailer is withholding from an invoice. So like Peter mentioned, lots of different buckets of revenue loss. But actually, well, I guess let me First, where would you find those in Home Depot? So you can find all of your chargeback information once you log into Supplier Hub. It'll be living in the merchandise payable self-service portal. I know it's a little bit of a mouthful of a name, but that's where they live. And if you can't see this application, or if you're missing any other applications that we might reference today within the webinar in your Supplier Hub account, you can always reach out to your partner guardian, and they should be able to grant you access. If you are not sure who your partner guardian is for your Supplier Hub account, if you go up at the top once you're logged in and click account, you'll see all of your high-level account information, and then it'll also list your partner guardians. So if you're wanting access to an application that you don't have, that's the best way to try and get access. And most of the applications that we'll talk about today, including merchandise payables, are going to be living in the financing and accounting bucket within Supplier Hub. Moving on, what are our most common chargebacks at Home Depot? Maybe a little bit dissimilar to some of the other retailers. Home Depot actually has a kind of a condensed list of AP deductions or chargebacks. So these are kind of our three that we're dealing with at Home Depot. So shortages, pricing discrepancies, and trade discounts. Shortages and pricing discrepancies are really going to be the two that are disputable within Home Depot within merchandise payables. So we'll go over kind of in detail, what they are and then how to dispute. Trade discounts are those contractual deductions. So we'll go into more detail on them as well, but did just want to go ahead and preface with, let's see, last summer, so summer of 2024, Home Depot did come and say, hey, trade discounts can no longer be disputed within merchandise payables, which, has its issues sometimes, but for the most part, it does seem like Home Depot takes them correctly. But since they are contractual, a little bit harder to dispute anyway. So we'll go over in more detail kind of what that encompasses, but did want to go ahead and call out that really the two main chargeback types that suppliers will be disputing will be the shortages and pricing discrepancies, and really honestly, primarily the shortages, which we'll spend most of our time on today. So what are shortages? So shortages are definitely, by far the most common issues suppliers across all different retailers are, getting hit with from retailers. So basically this is at any point, where Home Depot or another retailer says that they received less than the amount that was invoiced for quantity wise. So pretty straightforward. I bet everyone on the webinar probably has dealt with a shortage or two. And just for visibility on Home Depot side, if you're looking at their remittance advice, which we'll get into more detail later on how to pull that within merchandise payables, this is flagged as shortages. So pretty straightforward. They make it easy, at least in that regard, to know exactly what you're up against. And then pricing discrepancies. So pricing discrepancies are anything where Home Depot expected to pay less than what was the listed amount on the supplier's invoice. So that cost difference, they're charging you back for that cost difference. The reason code on the remittance, or just kind of across the board within merchandise payables for these pricing discrepancies, is just simply pricing discrepancy. So again, at least you know what kind of the chargeback is there. Just some kind of high-level information about pricing discrepancies. Like I mentioned earlier, we'll go into more depth on the shortages just because that's kind of where the meat of the deductions are with Home Depot. But I did want to spend a little bit of time just kind of going over pricing discrepancies in case anyone on the webinar here did want to try and dispute any of those, or have, incurred some of these chargebacks and kind of want a little bit more detail into what they are. So like I mentioned, this is at any point where the invoiced amount was greater than what Home Depot expected to pay for it. And so it can sometimes, especially within merchandise payables, there's not any item level detail as far as, what was deducted. So it can be kind of hard to pinpoint, what items might be causing these deductions, or, action steps that might be needed to be taken. So for the pricing discrepancies, there's a couple different places where you could find information on, where these chargebacks might be stemming from. So one is what Home Depot refers to as the 531 SKU detail report. So this is basically just a report that has, all of your SKUs with Home Depot, and then breaks down the Home Depot's cost that they expect to pay for those items. So this can be requested of your buyer with Home Depot. And then two, it's kind of just a good practice to maybe request this information from a buyer every so often. So, it might involve working with internally across teams at your organization to get, in contact with the buyer to get this information. But it is helpful just to understand, all of the different item breakdown details Home Depot is expecting. So that's kind of one place. And two, the 531 SKU detail, if there is a discrepancy that kind of supports, hey, maybe this pricing discrepancy chargeback was invalid. It's a great item to attach to a dispute. Some other places where you might be able to find information regarding pricing discrepancies and what items are causing those deductions. So IDM is, item data management, that tool within Supplier Hub that houses all of the item information, SKU information. So that includes cost, pack size, UPC, all of that good stuff. So in there, you could also see some great information regarding pricing, kind of do some analysis, some research to understand if there are any discrepancies and kind of back up any claims for pricing discrepancy chargebacks that might be invalid. And the last application that I'll mention that might have some of this data, some of you might be familiar with it, but Home Depot within Supplier Hub has an application called the Automated Dispute Resolution Platform. Another mouthful of a name for an application. And some of you may not have access to this application. It's another one where you can request your partner guardian to give you access if your organization has already been onboarded to this application. If not, you can request from Home Depot by submitting a ticket and requesting access for your organization to this application. But within it, they'll have really good information for POs that were sent to an RDC or a DFC. And this does include cost information as well. So you can look up a specific PO and try and better understand, if there were any cost discrepancies. And see exactly, what Home Depot was expecting to pay for that item. And again, that's another great one too, where you can have some backup information from there to attach to a pricing discrepancy dispute if you did deem that that was an invalid deduction that Home Depot took. Lastly, we have our trade discounts. Like I mentioned earlier, these are still chargebacks that Home Depot might be deducting. However, they are no longer disputable, which again, kind of for the most part, did seem like Home Depot was taking these. They were valid deductions just because they are based on that contractual amount in the supplier buyer agreement. So whenever that was signed or revised, your organization was agreeing to that allowance amount to be taken from each invoice. And this is typically on the vendor or the merchandise vendor number level. So we've got our payables vendor or P vendor, and then all of the M vendors that roll up into that P vendor or payables vendor at Home Depot. So just every single invoice, a percentage of that is allocated towards these trade discounts. Again, that varies on the end vendor. And then two, that usually another allowance that gets rolled up into this trade discount amount would be the IBX percentage, which is just a flat 1.25% that Home Depot takes across all of their invoices. And two, if you want more information on that IBX discount, if you go into Supplier Hub, they have a couple of great resources in their resources folder about IBX. If you just search that, you can get a little bit more detail on exactly what that allowance is encompassing. But really, trade discounts to make, just for cash application efficiency, sometimes it makes sense, or most of the time it might make sense for a supplier to really make sure and be conscientious of their EDI mapping. Just making sure that they're taking the correct trade discounts at the time of invoicing to kind of prevent some of these trade discount chargebacks from being incurred on the back end. So again, might be something that, if right now you're receiving a lot of these trade discount chargebacks and you kind of want to get that on the front end, it might be something that you would want to work with internally with your EDI team to see if there's any improvements that can be made with your EDI mapping to make sure that those appropriate discounts are being taken at the time of invoicing. mapping. Again, a lot of great resources within Supplier Hub on just what they're expecting on their EDI mapping side. But two, if you have any additional questions, they also have their B2B production support system. You can reach out to them via ticket within Supplier Hub to try and get, the conversation started, the ball rolling. They also have an email available within Supplier Hub where you can reach out and really try and figure out some of those EDI mapping issues if, trade discounts don't seem to be lining up quite right. And two, again, really the main goal there would just be, hey, let's take some of these trade discount chargebacks that we might be receiving kind of off our plate, get them out of the way, and really then start to focus in on more of those shortages and pricing discrepancies where you'll have, one, the ability to dispute, and then two, possibly an easier time winning those back. And then, like I mentioned before, Home Depot has also done, has created several resources, especially recently with a lot of changes that they're doing at their different DCs, just in regards to EDI mapping. So if you aren't familiar with that, again, might be a great place to kind of look within Supplier Hub or work with their B2B team or your EDI team internally to really try and understand, the mapping and all the ins and outs of that. All right, now let's get to the fun part. How do we dispute these chargebacks at Home Depot? So like I mentioned earlier, merchandise payables, that's the application within Supplier Hub where all of this is going to take place. I'm sure probably most of you have seen this application before, but we're going to just kind of walk step by step. How would you come in and really start to tackle some of these deductions? Like I mentioned, we know shortages and pricing discrepancies are fair game to be disputed. Another kind of rule that Home Depot has, you can only dispute over $25. So they do have that minimum in place. So your chargebacks, a dispute package, which we'll kind of go over the terminology of that here in a second, will only be created if the amount is over $25 for any shortage or pricing discrepancy. So once you log in to merchandise payables, you'll see that page. There's a couple different ways that you can kind of navigate to narrow down to a deduction that you might want to work on. One great place to start is this dispute chargeback invoice. Another one, I think the easiest way too is just if you have an invoice or a PO or even, a dispute package number in mind that you want to tackle, there's that great quick search bar on the top right-hand corner. You can just plug in that number. There's a bunch of different search criteria, hit go, and it'll take you straight to the chargeback dispute package that that is correlated with that invoice or PO. You can also, navigate this way, dispute chargeback by invoice, and that will take you to a page where you can see month by month all of the chargebacks associated with those invoices that were sent. So this can be a long list. But it's also really, kind of sometimes beneficial to kind of go through this list and see, sometimes chargebacks can get swept under the rug, but if you're coming through this list, you'll definitely see all of those chargebacks that you incurred for each month. And just a reminder, so at Home Depot, you can only dispute chargebacks back 12 months based on that deduction date. So that usually ends up being about 10 months, just depending on your payment terms based on invoice date. So just something to keep in mind. And then this page will be sorted by month invoice, and you'll have some high level information of just the number of invoices that were impacted and then that total chargeback amount. And then once you click into, a month, depending on how many, that there were, they might break it down a little bit further into day, hour, sometimes even, but so it can be a lot to come through. But again, it's sometimes important to just go through and make sure that you're kind of doing a sweep through everything to make sure that any shortage or pricing discrepancy dollars that you want to go after, you kind of have visibility into and can do so. So once you kind of click into that month, you'll see a lot of different information kind of on a table on that page. Some of that's listed here on this slide. Probably most important is going to be the invoice number and then that total chargeback, how much was deducted from that invoice. And then you can see a lot of other just tracking metrics of, disputed amount, receive date, all of that good stuff. So some that happened before, some that happened after that initial dispute. Two, also on these pages, you can always export. I will say the exports that live on these pages have a little bit less information than what you're seeing here. So, you know, take that with what you will, but can still be helpful, especially if you're looking at, have a large set of chargebacks that you incurred in a month. It might be easier to kind of work from an Excel sheet and prioritize based on amount, typically is what we see suppliers do. And then you get to, once you've picked one out, you say, oh, I've got this shortage, I'm going to go after. And now we get into the really fun, actually disputing part. So one thing I did want to call out with Home Depot and just kind of how they structure their deductions. Like we mentioned earlier, you have your chargeback, which is likely going to be that shortage, pricing discrepancy, or trade discounts will still be visible. But Home Depot will kind of wrap those chargeback deductions into what they call a dispute package. And this is the disputable entity within merchandise payables. So if you incurred, a shortage chargeback and a pricing chargeback on one invoice, you'll have those rolled up into one dispute package, as Home Depot refers to it. And if you wanted to dispute both, you kind of have to do so at the same time. So that's one really important thing to keep in mind, because once, if you dispute the shortage and you don't dispute the pricing discrepancy, once that's been submitted, you kind of lose out on disputing that pricing discrepancy. So, take some analysis on the front end to really make sure and you understand what you want to dispute, because you don't want to miss out on any dollars once that initial dispute has been submitted, because you can't go back after that, and we don't want to leave any dollars on the table. So, once you've got your dispute, your shortage, let's say from there, it's pretty basic standard of what you're going to submit. So comment and disputed amount are definitely those required fields. There's a couple other fields that you might want to fill out as well. So within merchandise payables, there's going to be a field for a freight carrier. So this is a pre-filled list that Home Depot provides based on their core carriers. So if you are a collect supplier, which probably most are, you might be able to find your carrier within that list. If you're prepaid, there is just a generic vendor truck. And I will say, sometimes Home Depot is always updating their routing guide, so you may not see the carrier that was used for that shipment. And that's okay, because really this freight carrier and even this tracking /BOL number field that are available for you to fill out are totally optional. But it definitely doesn't hurt to fill them out if you have that information ready to go. But no sweat if you don't, because I would say probably attachments are going to be the biggest thing. So making sure that you're attaching, and we'll go over in detail kind of best practices for attachments here in a little bit, but really those shipping documents are going to be most important when you're disputing with Home Depot. So once you've got, your comment, hey, Home Depot, take another look at this. You've got your tracking information possibly filled out. But like I said, most importantly, those shipping documents, you can go ahead and submit that claim. Typically, we see Home Depot's pretty quick to respond to disputes once they've been submitted. I know on here we have 10 to 14 days. That might even be a little bit generous. I've seen them as quick as, a week. But in some cases, it does take them a little bit longer and can be up to 18 days. So just something to keep in mind. They are quick. And two, on that same note, they're quick if they're going to be putting it kind of back into supplier action. So they've requested something more of you after that initial dispute. Typically, we see a lot of times if you submit a BOL to start, they might come back and request a POD and kind of put it in supplier action. So you need to take action on it. They will also do this pretty quick. So it's always good to kind of be coming in and double checking and make sure that they haven't asked or requested any other documentation on a dispute, because you want to make sure that you get to that pretty promptly, because after they put it in supplier action, you only have 30 days to respond, or they're going to automatically deny that dispute package. And that would be really unfortunate because, and we'll talk about this in a second too, I know I keep on saying that, but once something's been denied, it's a little bit more difficult to get Home Depot's attention again. There's really no official redisputing process. So being really prompt with your response, especially when Home Depot requests another document of you, is important, just to make sure that you're making the most of that dispute. And like I mentioned earlier, we don't want to leave any dollars on the table. So disputing denied claims. Here's the slide that I was talking about. So Home Depot They don't really have an official way to redispute denied claims, unfortunately. Trust me, I wish they did. But you can kind of redispute by opening a dialogue after that denial. This is kind of, I like to think of it just kind of like as a message center on that dispute with that initial reviewer who looked at your claim. So let's say, you submitted your shortage dispute, 5 days later, 7 days later, Home Depot came back and unfortunately denied the dispute. If you really feel confidently, hey, we shipped this in full, you can always open a dialogue. And that will basically send a message to that initial reviewer to take another look at that initial dispute. Again, I will say it does kind of seem like there's a little bit of more of a delayed process versus kind of that initial dispute with Home Depot. It might take a little bit longer for that reviewer to take another look. And, sometimes they may not even respond, unfortunately. But, there is some value in kind of taking this approach and opening a dialogue on these denied claims, because we do see on occasion that suppliers will get approved after the fact. And that's probably just because Home Depot has some new receiving information, to overturn that original denial. So there is some value in kind of opening that dialogue and seeing after the fact, if Home Depot might have some new information to overturn. The only way that they're going to do that is that that reviewer will then reopen the dispute package. So you'll see it move from the closed to open status, which we'll go over the statuses here in a second. And then they'll kind of move it back into the review process. And then you would see it move from the denied to the approved status. And then the package would be closed again. I got ahead of myself, but here are kind of the statuses that I was alluding to. So just because, like I mentioned, that hierarchy that Home Depot has for their deductions. So you have your deductions, also known as your chargebacks. So those are your shortages, your pricing discrepancies, and your trade discounts. And then those kind of roll up into what Home Depot refers to as the dispute package, which of course is your disputable entity with Home Depot. And I'll say it again because I think it's really important. If you've got two chargebacks in one dispute package and you want to dispute both, you got to do so at the same time or you miss out on the opportunity to dispute one of those. So I'm going to harp on that, but I do think it is important. So the chargebacks will have, your approved or your denied statuses because that happens on the individual level with the individual chargeback level. And then your dispute package will either be in draft status. So this is, dispute has not necessarily been started yet. Nothing's been submitted. And then your open status, this is when it's either in pending Home Depot review or, like I mentioned, supplier action or vendor review, and then closed. So this closed status would happen after they've made their final decision on those chargeback disputes. So just something to keep in mind, this is kind of the process flow that Home Depot takes. So once a dispute package has moved into that closed status, if there is a denial on it, like I mentioned, it's hard to get Home Depot's attention, but opening a dialogue just might do so, and then they would move it back into that open status. And one thing too, if you are disputing a pricing discrepancy and a shortage within one dispute package, those can have different outcomes. So your shortage could get approved and your pricing discrepancy could get denied, or vice versa, or both could get approved, both can get denied. So just something to keep in mind, especially when you're kind of looking at that resolution and trying to understand, approved dollars versus denied dollars on those claims. All right. Now let's get into proof documentation. So like I mentioned earlier, I kind of covered pricing discrepancies and some of the proof docs that you might find valuable to dispute with. In those different sources within Supplier Hub. Another great document for pricing discrepancies is, any communication between a buyer that might have happened to kind of validate the price for an item. But in this next section, we're really going to focus on the shortages, just because, probably the most easily disputed. I know I say that, take that with a grain of salt, but probably most easily disputed and kind of most rounded out way to look at it from just a proof documentation side. So we'll go over what is good, better, and best for proof documentation to dispute shortages at Home Depot. So good proof documentation, like I mentioned a little bit ago, there are those fields on every dispute package where you can select the carrier from Home Depot's little drop down that they have there. If you can't find your carrier, that's okay. You can leave it blank or just select another option. They have some just generic ones in there. And then they have that field for either, BOL, Pro, tracking number. If you have multiple, make sure you're separating that by a comma in there. But again, this is kind of, you could just submit this and leave it at that if you have that information. But I think really what's going to be most impactful is making sure that we're getting some sort of shipping document attached to that dispute. So probably going to be most beneficial if you're a collect supplier with Home Depot is going to be that BOL, I would say, is number one. Making sure you get that attached and get your disputes out there, going to be a good deal. If you're a prepaid, POD is awesome. And then two, just some other proof documentations that, definitely don't hurt to attach if you have them available, would be a packing slip and an invoice. Packing slip, especially, it's sometimes nice for Home Depot just to get that granular level information for that claim that may not, or for that shipment that may not be listed on the BOL. And then two, invoice. And one thing I didn't mention earlier, but for pricing discrepancies, if you are disputing those, I would say an invoice copy is also going to be a really great proof documentation for that. And then just looking at, if you wanted to go above and beyond disputing your shortages, photos of pallets might be beneficial just at the warehouse before they leave. Could make a good claim there. And then two, if you had an ASN copy, this could also be beneficial when you look at disputing shortages with Home Depot. But really at the end of the day, if you had to ask me what's going to be the best to dispute a shortage with Home Depot, if you're a collect supplier, I definitely say getting that BOL attached is going to be most important. And then if you're a prepaid supplier, definitely getting that POD attached is going to be most important. All right. I think that wraps up my slides, Peter, if we want to get into some Q&A.
Yep. We don't have any questions right now, so we'll go on to the next little bit here. We're going to put our, oh, not yet. So I mentioned some of the resources that we have already. We've got an ebook on Home Depot that I did not share in the chat, but that will have a little bit more of a kind of the bigger picture of revenue loss at Home Depot. So that could be helpful, but as you can see here, we have a lot of Walmart content. We have a lot of Amazon content as well. So just another pitch for those longer form pieces of content that we do on SupplierWiki. So there's that. I'm also going to put our emails up here in a little bit too, so that on the next slide. Oh, sorry. Could you go one more, Annalee?
Yep.
Before we do that. So y'all could get our emails down if you don't have a question right now, you think you might a little bit later, whether that's a just general kind of Home Depot question for us or a product related question. So Annalee's going to go into our product here in a little bit and kind of talk about some of the things that we started the conversation with the webinar. She'll kind of talk about some of those parts that are most relevant to the product itself and some of the benefits there. So if you have any questions about that process as well, you can definitely still ask them in the webinar, but you can also just email us later on too. So I think that's plenty of time. We can go to the product now here.
Let's see. So yeah, like Peter mentioned, I'm going to kind of walk through at SupplyPike just our product offering for a Home Depot solution. So I know Peter mentioned it kind of earlier on. Really, a main goal at SupplyPike is for us to just take the friction out of disputing. We know that that's a super manual process today for suppliers, and truly, it's hard to go after every single dollar. And so we want to make, our goal here is to, one, how do we take the friction? How do we take the time and just the manual man hours truly that go behind disputing, and then two, just go after every dollar that you're owed from a retailer. So we sit on top of these retailer portals, but really we're just giving you the tools necessary to, automate the process. And then two, I think another huge benefit that we offer is just the visibility. It's hard sometimes to manually pull all of that data and really aggregate it and try and understand it and digest it. So we want to make that easy. Again, it's really just about that time savings. And then two, just having a really good understanding of the rev loss that you're incurring with these retailers can really help inform business decisions and really help you better understand supply chain and maybe some areas that you might be lacking and some opportunities to improve your supply chain as well. And of course, we talked about the disputing, but I also like to think that our solutions for all of our different retailers are really beneficial across your organization too. So not even just accounting teams. There's a lot of good detail and information that we have out there that other teams within your organization might find beneficial. Because really, again, at the end of the day, we really want to make sure that we're just kind of putting a lens on everything related to your supply chain. So without further ado, I'll kind of walk through our Home Depot solution. So we pull in all of our suppliers' data. And like I mentioned, we're really just wanting to do a lot of dashboarding, a lot of reports on this information, aggregate the data. Again, something that would be a very manual process. We want to make super easy because half the battle is just visibility. So we'll break down all of the different codes that we talked about. So shortages, pricing discrepancies, give you the high level information, hey, for the past year, here's the amount that you've incurred with this retailer. And then we give a couple other different metrics. So deductions by amount, I think that this is a really cool graph that we kind of break down here because whether your shortage was under $100 or over $1,000, it takes the same amount of time. But it's really interesting just to kind of see from like a time savings cost perspective, just the analysis there. And then two, another thing that I think is really impactful, especially for Home Depot suppliers, is breaking down deductions by location. Some RDCs might be a little bit worse than others when it comes to deductions. And it's really interesting to just see, RDCs that you might be shipping to very frequently. Are you receiving higher deductions there versus others? So really great look at just kind of understanding, where your deductions are falling kind of just within Home Depot's DC distribution. So a lot of good data here. Again, and this is super customizable too. A huge, thing we encourage within our applications is just, slice and dice the data, really get in there and try and understand because you can only take action when you truly understand your data. So we offer a lot of different filter options and then, of course, the ability to export. So we're also really big on, hey, there's a lot of data in here, but we recognize, suppliers also want to take that data and export it, share it within their organization, keep it for their own record keeping purposes. So we always make the data available. And then two, just I think a huge benefit of SupplyPike and really what I like to think is just kind of the backbone of what we do is that document integration piece. So Peter alluded to this earlier. So, half the battle of disputing these claims is just where are my documents, the manual process of trying to track down those documents and get them attached to the dispute, along with all the other things you have to consider when you're disputing. So we have really awesome software that, if a document's living digitally somewhere, we're going to be able to grab it. And then we can, with our OCR technology, we scan all of those different documents and we associate them to the claim that they belong to. So, potentially taking hours out of someone's time to really track down those documents and understand, or try and pair them up to the dispute. So a lot of manual time savings happens there with our document piece. And then to all of the other details and information that come along with, just understanding how to dispute. We kind of fill in the gaps there. And we also make everything super customizable with that automation. So you have a lot of different ways to dispute a claim within our software. So you can single click, but really where our suppliers find the most benefit is when you kind of economies of scale, I like to think. So you can bulk submit claims. You can also opt to turn on auto disputing, which candidly, most of suppliers that are using our software today do turn this on, and then basically our system, once we get those documents, attach the correct claims, we just submit them right back to the retailer. So, you know, you don't even have to necessarily worry about lifting a finger to get those disputes out there. You're really maximizing your time, and then you can come in and manage exceptions, or kind of like we talked about during the presentation, you know, a big thing with Home Depot is making sure that we're managing any exceptions or anything that comes back into supplier action. So really making the most use of your time, and really understanding, you know, prioritization and what to work on next is a huge thing within SupplyPike. So we really like to organize a lot of these, you know, disputes and claims into these different workflows. And then two, on top of that, lots of different filters to just truly dive into the data, understand it better, and just, you know, really get a better vision of your rev loss as a whole within Home Depot. Let's see, I think we have a question. Peter, can you maybe help see? I think we had a question, possibly.
Yeah. Arthur wants to know, this is from the chat, how did we get the key rec number?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple different ways. So sometimes you'll see on a shortage dispute that Home Depot will already have that key rec number populated. In other cases, you know, they might say no key rec. And to be honest, when they say no key rec, it might be possible that that key rec can't be found just because they have no record of receiving that product within their system. I know I mentioned this application earlier, the automated dispute resolution platform within Supplier Hub. I will say for RDC and DFC shipments, sometimes in merchandise payables where you might see no key rec or that generic key rec, that generic key rec a lot of times will just be the RDC number and then followed by some zeros. And that's how you kind of know they have no record of receiving for that particular shipment, or no key rec was found. Anyway, the automated dispute resolution platform within Supplier Hub sometimes will have the actual key rec. And two, you can get a lot of more granular visibility into key recs for a particular shipment. So I would recommend, you know, if you don't have access to the application today, maybe requesting it from a partner guardian, or if you need to escalate it to Home Depot to try and get onboarded onto that application. There's a lot of good information, and sometimes you can find a key rec in there that may not be visible within merchandise payables, in which case you can update that key rec within merchandise payables to be what you find in the automated dispute resolution platform to submit with your dispute. I realize that's a little bit of a manual process, and you know, sometimes it can be hit or miss, but if you were, you know, had a particular dispute where you were missing that key rec, you could try and go find that information within the automated dispute resolution platform. Awesome. And then two, just from a SupplyPike side, we're grabbing that key rec, whatever is visible in merchandise payables, and making it visible within our application. So again, we're just grabbing that information from merchandise payables. We actually grab a lot of the high level order information from a lot of different spots within merchandise payables and make it easy, put it in one spot, and associate it to its correct dispute. Another thing too is we're always going to show you activity on a dispute. So as you're, you know, taking action on a dispute package, we'll show you all of that updated history. And then, like I mentioned in the webinar or in the slides, you can open a dialogue straight from the SupplyPike app as well. So we make it a little bit easier, especially just with some of our workflows. It makes it really easy to kind of narrow down, identify what you want to work on. And then two, one of what I think are our best features. It's a little bit manual, one by one, to open a dialogue on all of your denied claims. But we actually make it super easy within SupplyPike to go ahead and open a dialogue in bulk. So you can open a dialogue on up to 100 denied claims at once, just requesting, you know, hey, Home Depot, can you take another look? Whatever you want to put in there, but something that would probably take you hours to do one by one, you can do with a couple of clicks on those denied claims within our SupplyPike application. So again, letting the automation do the work, taking, you know, giving back some time savings. And then of course, hopefully we see some improved dollars from that too. So just one of the cool tools that we have within the SupplyPike application for Home Depot suppliers. And kind of how I was mentioning earlier, really another huge benefit is, of course, being able to filter down data, better understand, but we're going to keep track of your data indefinitely, which is really nice, especially, we've seen in the past, sometimes data within merchandise payables just kind of goes away after some time. So we're always going to hold on to that data. And then you always will have the ability, like I mentioned on the dashboard, to export that data. So really a great way to keep track of things. A lot of good information within our export deductions and our export chargebacks CSVs that we have here. So a great way to look at the data and really truly understand. And then, once you've saved the time and the disputing, letting the automation handle that, you can really start to dive into some of this data and try and look at some root cause. Well, Peter, any other questions in the chat?
I don't think so. I really liked the made up names on the for the actors side of things for our custom data. Those were pretty fun. You don't get to see that if you buy the app. You only get to see it on demos. So
where the fun is.
Yeah, Crookshank the third, something like that. That's really great. All right, well, that's all that we have for y'all today. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to reach out to us. You'll be getting the video recording and the slide deck in the next couple of days. So if you didn't get our emails then, you'll be able to get them later on as well. So, but yeah, thank you all for joining us. It's great to have you. Till next time.